On today's episode of Quest, fine artist Ariana Victoria talks about her art, her spirituality, and her brush with an evil entity. All this and more on Quest. Life is a quest for logic and reason. It is a quest to find balance between science and faith. Life is a quest for knowledge and understanding. But most importantly, it's a quest for personal discovery. Whatever your quest, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Welcome to Quest. Hello everyone, I'm your host, Todd Fischer, and this is Quest. For those of you that might be new listeners, let me tell you a little about me. I'm the founder of Metacortex and the author of the best-selling book, Metacortex, The Grand Design. I'm a philosopher, a theorist, a metaphysicist. I'm a perpetual pupil of theology, and I'm an expert in comparative religious study. I've also extensively researched the mind-body connection, anatomy, and physiology. I documented over 300 case studies while researching my book, all from a scientific perspective, with cases that ranged from near-death and out-of-body experiences to possession to past life experiences, as well as the metaphysical, the paranormal, and other unexplained cases of a spiritual nature. This podcast will bring you some of those astonishing stories, and in some cases by the people that actually lived them. From time to time, I'll be talking about important, perhaps even controversial issues from both spiritual and scientific points of view. The world we live in is ever-changing, and there's often a conflict between spirituality and science, and I wanted to bring you this podcast to balance that equation. It will show you how we know what we know, and there's still so much we don't know. For me, curiosity is part of what makes us human. It's the joy of discovery. It's what drives us. It's our quest. Today I'm joined by my friend Ariana Victoria. Ariana shares details about her life and her art and a chilling tale of experiencing an evil entity. She also talks about a series of out-of-body experiences. This is an incredible story, and some of the details are truly terrifying. Let's start the podcast. On today's episode of Quest, I have fine artist Ariana Victoria joining me. Hi, Ariana. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. How about yourself?
Very good, very good. I'm glad we could do a Quest podcast. I air all these out of order. I've already had you as a guest on my Unheard podcast, but I don't know which one of these will be airing first. So I've got you on both, which is great because this one will be a uniquely different podcast than the other. So let's start by introducing you to the audience. So you are a fine artist, and why don't you tell everyone kind of your style of art and a little bit about your background and how you got into doing this?
So I would consider myself a surrealistic contemporary artist. I work with oils on canvas as my go-to medium. I occasionally dabble in graphite pencil sketches as well. I was born on the East Coast, but raised in Europe, Palma de Mallorca to be exact. And I have been living and working in LA for about 6 years now.
Great. Did you go to school to be an artist, or was it just something that was always with you?
I never had any formal training. It's just something that I picked up from a very early age, and it's just always been with me.
Do you remember how young you were when you first started doing your first crayon sketches?
Well, according to my mother, I started sketching from around the age of 2 or 3, and wow. She just, encouraged it and nourished it, and I kind of, taught myself to where I am now.
So you were actually born in America, is that correct?
Yes.
But
Yes.
you grew up in Europe. So how did that transition happen?
So when my mother remarried, instead of having him fly back and forth, he decided to relocate all of us so he could spend more time with all of us. And at the time, it was a wonderful cultural experience. It was a bit of a culture shock at first, but I would say it made me a better person growing up abroad.
And you were in Spain, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
I was
And it
living
went,
on an island in the Mediterranean it's part of the Balearic Islands. It was the island of Mallorca.
what years were you there? What age range did you spend there?
I was there from the age of 12 to 20.
Wow, that's incredible. So a lot of your schooling was there too.
Yes.
Wow, that's great. And so then you come back to America, and you've got this bulk of this interesting European experience. Were you doing art in Europe? How did that influence your style?
Well, I was one of my favorite artists. I was so happy to see while I was there was Gaudi. That he has lots of buildings on the island of Mallorca, and also there's lots of very medieval Gothic architecture as well. In fact, Mallorca has the only Gothic cathedral that's on the water, so it's really quite a sight.
Wow. I'll add that to my bucket list of places to visit.
Yes, it's beautiful. The beaches there put the beaches of LA to shame.
I bet. So when you come back to America, you're still drawing, you're still painting. I'm a fan of your work, so I've seen a wide swath of what your capabilities are. So I've seen you work with your oils, I've seen you work with watercolors, I've seen your pencil work, and I'm always dazzled how an artist can move in and out of so many different mediums like that. I'm curious. So for people that I can't even draw stick figures. I have no artistic ability whatsoever when it comes to being able to paint or draw. I would love to be able to paint, but it's just not in the cards for me right now anyways. But I'm curious. So when someone wants to get into doing art, is it expensive to get into that? Like if I wanted to start doing it, is it going to cost me a lot in canvases and paints and brushes and things like that?
Well, it depends what direction you want to go in. If you want to, be completely dedicated to it, then yes, it's going to be costly. But if you are just curious and you want to experiment and just take it on as a hobby, you don't need that much. You pick a medium and you get the supplies for that particular medium and you go with it. So if you want to do something in charcoal, you get papers and charcoal, and I believe it's an eraser, and that's what you work with for a while. And if you don't like that, then you try something else.
Can famous artists come from a schooling way of picking up their craft? I often wonder this as a photographer. I've been a photographer for a long time, and I have my own specific, unique way that I shoot, as unique as you can be in the photography world, where everything has been tried. But I remember someone telling me one time that if you pick up a book about how to be a photographer, and you learn this 3-point lighting system, where the lights need to be and where you need to shoot, what the framing is, you'll never be a famous photographer, because that's the cookie cutter way of doing things. Is art school a cookie cutter way of being an artist? Do you have to kind of find your own way? Or is that a way people can go to learn? Or will they become great?
Oh, well, that's an avenue I'm not quite as familiar with because I didn't go into art school. But knowing people who have gone versus people who haven't, art school is really mostly a platform to translate your skills digitally and to also create a community and job sourcing for your art.
I
That's
see.
really what it's designated for.
I see. I see. That's interesting. So, you mentioned digital as a platform. Is digital destroying destroying the art world? I mean, I have mixed emotions on this. I've told you this before, and I feel like digital art isn't real art, because to me, real art exists in an original somewhere. There's an original painting before any prints were made, and I'll say this. So I think just to kind of tell people kind of maybe how this process works is there's an original, and then you make prints from an original, and then the first batch of those prints would be signed and numbered, and that would make them valuable based on the lower number that you get. And then there's just signed editions, and then there's just prints. And all of these are available for sale from the original all the way down, but there's still an original it's all based off of. And I don't get how there's an original in digital art. How do you feel about this?
Well, I look at digital art the same way as you look at digital currency.
Okay.
We know you can send digital art to and fro and alter it on a digital platform, but that's the only place where it exists. And if you think about it, most of the money in the world, does it actually exist physically?
Okay.
And
so it doesn't matter. So you're saying an original doesn't matter. It's just all copies.
Essentially, but it does take an eye in order to manipulate something even on a digital platform.
To me, it seems like the magic comes from you having this skill in your mind, in your heart, that translates through your arms, through your hands, through the brush, onto the canvas. And that's a truly magical type of thing that's happening. But with digital, it seems like that the computer and the software might be doing all the work. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it's all a type of tool, really. And it's, because you can take a digital artist and put a paintbrush in their hand, and the tool is so foreign to them, they lose their ability to translate their eye onto a physical thing.
And that works just the opposite too. So the fine artist might not be able to translate what they know digitally.
Exactly.
I see. Interesting question. Do you find yourself attached to like a favorite brush? Does that happen, that you have one brush you like to use a lot? Do you have things like that are you're careful to use a lot?
Let's say I have a group of brushes I tend to favor. I wouldn't say I have one particular brush that I use all the time, because you need, just like for a job, you need different tools to accomplish different tasks. If you need something more detailed, you need a smaller brush. If you're painting large scale, you're going to need a bigger brush. They're both valuable when put in the right circumstance.
Are they valuable in a sentimental way?
No, I wouldn't say so. Because at the end of the day, it's a brush, and brushes can be replaced. Now, if we were in a post-apocalyptic world and brushes were no longer being made and no one knew how to make brushes, then I would be very I would be very sentimental and protective of the brushes that I currently have.
Well, the reason why I asked that is I actually have an easel from a very famous artist, and it's precious to me because I know what paintings he painted on this thing. So every place where he dabbed a brush on the easel, on the wooden easel, I'm like, that's part of his history of what was going on. And for me, like, I know that those types of things are sentimental to him, and I happen to have one of these things. So like, it's kind of a treasure in a way. And that's why I was wondering if, an artist would set brushes aside from a piece of work that they did, or remembered what they painted this with, and whether they had some kind of sentimental value like that. So I was just curious. It's probably just me, sentimental Todd.
Well, I think being sentimental towards something in its own right is a luxurious thing, because I can tell you I've lost equipment due to storage units getting flooded. I've lost paintings in the process of that. I've had paintings taken from me. I've had to replace equipment because it would break, and if getting upset or emotional over things is going to keep you from moving forward, then I don't think it's worth being sentimental about that.
Yeah, I get that. Do you think talent like what you have, is this a gift from God, or just acquired environmentally, or what you were doing in your life, or just it was for fun? What do you think it is?
I think it is, because it comes to me more easily than anything else.
I have several. Artists are interesting people, and I have many artist friends, and I always hear different stories about how their craft. I get a common story though, the typical muse type story that is like the lady in black that delivers finished art to them in their dreams, or in meditation, or in quick flashes. And it's interesting, and that type of story goes way back. This goes back to Roman and Greek mythology, mainly Greek mythology, which kind of also mirrors the story of how the hierarchy of the angels were. And so, just to kind of like throw this out there, taking a little side tour from our conversation, in the Greek gods, Zeus had daughters who were muses. And there was a muse for each type of art. So there was a muse of art, there was a muse of poetry, a muse of music, there were muses of sculpture, and all these muses would go out into the world, and they would seed art into the world by whispering in the ears of people, basically. And great songs were written, great compositions were written, great works of art, and Michelangelo and Van Gogh, and there were so many artists through the centuries that claim to have been inspired by the muse. And some people just think of that as an energy that they pick up on. Some people think it's a physical visitation of some sort. But I find that all very interesting, and to hear their stories and their sincerity about it. And on that side, it seems so light. And I mean light as in light and dark side here. On the muse side, it seems very light, in that some form of angel or God or something has visited people and granted them this gift to make something beautiful for the world. Because the idea of the muse is this: these daughters of Zeus were beautiful women that the artist went to create for them. But really what they were symbolic of the public. So, and that's what happens in music, for instance, or poetry or whatnot. They're usually written about an instance or a person. Like some of the greatest songs in music are about people, and they pour everything into these, and they make these awesome hit songs over the breakup or the love or something that they had, and then these songs become epic, and they're no longer about that person. They're about it's for the world. And I find that interesting in the idea of the muse. And where I was going to go with this was, on the dark side of that, I know many artists that are fed by being in the darkness and being depressed or angry, or they've had some terrible trauma in their life, and they put it into their art. And their art is uniquely different, and it's dark and it's disturbing in a way. It's still great art, and it moves you, which is what art is supposed to do, but it comes from a completely different place. I'm curious, and I've said a lot here, but I'm curious your opinion on this. Does this theory hold water? How do you feel about this? Do artists live in the light and the dark? What do you think?
I have not met an artist who isn't troubled. It's funny. I actually showed my art to an acquaintance of mine who's never seen it before, and his response was, "Oh my gosh, you must be so messed up. All of the talented ones are."
Oh man.
was like, what is that supposed to mean? Excuse you.
Wow. Wow.
And I think there is a correlation to talent and trauma. And it seems like there has to be pain somewhere for it to be profound. And it could be profoundly beautiful, or it could be profoundly dark.
Yeah. 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 It's fascinating how it is, what inspires people. And maybe that's why I'm not an artist. I haven't been traumatized enough. I'm not sure. I guess I could experiment with that, right?
Well, when I see celebrities, usually when they go through a breakdown, or I find I have more respect for them, and I think their work improves immensely if they can get through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you grow up religious or spiritual at all?
Yes, I grew up in a Catholic home, and it was a very, I want to say very loosely Catholic.
Were you baptized Catholic?
I believe so. I can't even recall.
You might be too little to have recalled.
No, I mean, like, I don't ever recall asking my mother about it if I was or not. So
I assume you probably never went through like confirmation to become like a confirmed Catholic. You just kind of were in a Catholic household?
Yes.
Okay. Did you go to church a lot? Did you have a good religious experience?
When I was a young child and we were still living in the US, we would go to church quite often. And I did not have a very good experience with it, to be quite honest.
What was your problem with going to church? What was wrong with your experience?
Well, Sunday school for one, they would not allow me to draw with my left hand, and I would be scorned and punished anytime I would draw something fantastic, or in the fantasy realm, because when I was young, I loved dragons and fairies and anything mythical, really, and this was highly frowned upon.
This was too dark for the nun, right?
Yes, they considered it evil, and they would sometimes try to beat the evil out of me. So,
do you consider yourself religious now?
No, I would not consider myself religious. And as cliche as this sounds, I would consider myself more spiritual. There was a period where I was a complete atheist and did not even want to acknowledge anything more. But now I would say I find myself more and more curious and to why things are the way that they are.
Yeah. Good. So when you came back to America, you had an interesting experience with some form of entity. And I want to go into that story. You still okay with talking about this?
Yes, it was actually, when this happened, it happened before I went to Spain.
Oh, it happened before you went to Spain?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure on the time frame. I assumed it was when you went back to America, but it happened in America, but before you went to Spain.
Yes.
Okay. Set up the who, what, where, when, why. So how old were you? What was the location of the incident? And were there people with you? Let's start with that.
Yes. So this was in South Florida. I want to say Palm Beach. And my mother, who had just given birth to my third brother at the time, I must have been 7 or 8 years old. I was with my brother, Tommy. We were only 2 years apart, and a bunch of neighbor kids who were living next door to us at the time. And if I recall correctly, we were in the backyard hanging out, and we decided to go exploring. And we had noticed that this old house that was proclaimed to be haunted had been refurbished, and it was up for sale. And we were all dared by my brother to go into the house and see if it was haunted. So the doors weren't locked. So we went into the house and we started playing balls and jacks, and we were there for a couple hours and nothing had happened. And we were speaking amongst ourselves when we saw this shadow appear, and it started to glide across the wall, and we were all still and silent, and we weren't sure if this was some sort of prank or a projection, but this was a tall, lean, dark shadow. It looked very similar to that of the shadow of Nosferatu, long, skinny, pointy ears, long, very long, pointed fingers. And when it was on the wall, it seemed like it turned and looked over its shoulder when it stopped at a doorway and literally stepped off the wall and became 3D, and then stepped back onto the other wall and became 2D again and continued its way out a window. And we all left that house screaming.
It went
at the
out the
top
window?
of our lungs. Yes.
Wow. Would you say, that's an incredible story. So would you say that it was human-sized?
It was very tall.
When it went
Very
into
tall.
when it went into the door frame, was it to the top of the door frame? Do you recall? Was it taller than that?
It was grazing the door frame, the top of the door frame.
I see. Could you make out what its body shape was? Was it wearing something? Was it?
It seemed like it was wearing a long dark cloak up, and it was even covering the lower portion of its face, so I could only see fingers peeking out from the fabric and the top portion of the head.
Do you think it looked more human, or did it look more demon?
It definitely did not look human.
Okay. And everything you would say was pretty much a grayscale of, or black and white, like there was no color to the eyes, no.
There was some color to the eyes.
Do you recall what it was?
The eyes were a very yellow, milky color.
Could you make out the skin color?
The skin was dark and ashy.
Wow. Did it appear to be touching the floor, or was it hovering?
It appeared to be touching the floor, but the fact that it went from a 2D silhouette to a 3D entity and then went back to a 2D form and stuck along the edges of each wall after wrapping itself around the outside of the window ledge outside.
How long did the whole incident take?
I think all this happened within 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds tops.
Interesting. And did it appear to see you? Did it try to communicate,
Oh,
or was it
it
just
saw us.
it
It
saw you?
saw us. It
But it
looked at
still,
us
yeah.
and seemed it seemed like he had better things to do.
So all the kids that were in that room, you all share the same story, and that story still exists today. You can have that conversation with
Yes.
them, and everyone still holds the same memory of this.
Yes. I have lost touch with the kids who were with me at the time. I'm sure they can be found. But my brother, he was outside the house when all of this had happened. And he could tell you what he heard. He heard all of us screaming and running out of the house.
Yeah. Wow. And how old was he? He was 2 years younger than you, or older?
Yes. He's
So
2
he
years
was,
younger.
So he was what, 6?
I'm going to say 7.
Yeah. So he wasn't out there standing in the window, moving his hands around, faking you guys out.
No, he was on the other side of the house.
Yeah.
Opposite from where we were.
Fascinating. And do you recall what the day was like that day? Was it a sunny day where you went out exploring?
It was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful day. Not a cloud in the sky, bright, sunny.
And you wouldn't think that it was a helicopter flying over, or an aircraft, and it was a shadow coming through a window. It was not mistakable to be that.
No.
You think what you saw was something that was not of this plane.
No, you know, unless if they had some sort of 3D projections in a random house in Florida to fool a bunch of little kids. And even then, you know, when I recall, I mean, if this house was brand new, repainted, no light fixtures in place. So if there was something in the corner, you would have noticed.
Yeah. What do you think it was that you saw?
For lack of a better term, I think it was a demon or some sort of shadow entity.
Do you think it left any effect on you?
I don't know.
You were hesitant to want to bring this up for a while. I've been asking you about this, wanting to talk about this for a while, and you've been on the fence about it because you were worried that maybe you would manifest this back into your life, or something might happen if you recalled the experience. What makes you think that?
Well, I think this may sound silly, but you know what I've seen with pop culture, and even, you know, dealing with even in the Catholic faith, you know, you don't try to draw attention to something like that. You don't want to accidentally summon something or accidentally call it back to you.
Yeah. Too many movies there that are giving you misinformation.
Yep, you're probably right, but
we can chant Beetlejuice 3 times if you want to.
See, that was just my own superstition. You know, I was like, you know what? There's no, you know, I'm not hurting anyone by not talking about it or bringing it up. And, you know, anytime I would share this story, people would just think, oh, kids, you know, they're just crazy.
So this happened before you went to Spain.
Yes.
And you became an atheist later.
Yes.
How could you become an atheist after having an experience like that? I mean, that for you to experience that is really proof of the paranormal, which is really kind of proof that there is another plane. There is a different type of spirituality that's out there. And I'm curious how you could become an atheist, but and also have that experience.
The reason why I became an atheist because I had only had experiences with something that of a darker nature. When I would hear people speak of, how angels spoken to them or God has spoken to them, I would actually get jealous because I was like, why hasn't God answered my prayers? Or why, what am I doing wrong? Is there something that I'm not doing enough? Because I knew that dark entities existed, but I felt like I didn't have enough evidence of an ethereal or celestial being of a good nature existing.
Sure, yeah. But if something of that dark nature can exist, then therefore the opposite must also be right.
See, I didn't believe that though. I was like, well, I guess there, just isn't a God because there's so much suffering going unanswered.
Do you believe in angels?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So your stance on things now is much different than in your past. So because you saw something dark, you also tend to, if that was a demon, if it in fact was a demon, then you may also be believing in angels too.
Yeah,
since they're really in the same order.
But at the time, I wasn't sure what I saw. Or if it was just.
Have you ever had any other experiences?
Yes. If we're speaking on more about the paranormal and the supernatural, I had a couple of outer body experiences as a child.
How old were you? Do you remember?
So this was before the demon incident. I must have been 6. These are some of my earliest memories.
Yeah.
And we were living with my mom at the time, and this very big house, beautiful house in Florida that she had designed, and she had all these very ornate trinkets and masks from all over the world hanging all over the walls.
Yeah.
To this day, my mother believes that the masks had something to do with my outer body experiences, because the more masks and artifacts she brought into the home, the more I was experiencing these outer body experiences. And the time she took it seriously is when I told her that I could see myself floating above my body, and I knew I was sleeping, and that something was pulling me from my body, and I was having to swim or through the air and get back into my body. And every time it was harder for me to come into my body.
How many times did you have the experience?
I only recall 2 times.
Okay.
She said that there were more.
Interesting. And when you were no longer around the masks, then this ceased happening.
So what she did is she removed all of the masks from the home, and she had a priest come in and bless the house. And also bless me as well. And I've never had another outer body experience since then.
What happened to the masks?
I don't know.
Who did they belong to?
They belonged to my mother. She might have sold them or donated them to a museum.
Interesting. But she definitely doesn't have them anymore.
No.
Wow. Fascinating. That would be great. That's always the rub with cases like this, because what's ideal is if something, there's a lot of ways out-of-body experiences can be triggered. But if there was a mass that in fact was triggering it, the evidence is gone. So that's always like, the case stops cold, We'll never really know, because even if your mom were to remember where they came from, we would still never really be able to source back, where they were, but if where they came from or who made them or what. But if we have access to the masks, you can do some science with that. You can conduct some tests. You can do things to figure out if there's a mask you can isolate. Masks are a very interesting thing. You might have had something really interesting in that house. Masks are so ceremonial. There's so much energy that's attached to those types of things, good and bad. It's that definitely could have been the cause. But also, young people tend to slip into things like that easier. Young children are more susceptible to being able to communicate or see angels or demons or roaming souls, which are ghosts, things like that. Young kids are more in tune with that. You lose that as you get older. But it's fascinating, because it really would be one or the other. It might have been just you being able to get into that sweet spot during your metaconscious state while you're asleep, or the masks were pulling you or triggering you or something. Are those the only experiences that you have?
Well, I can recall what the masks looked like. I think at the time she believed that 2 masks were the main culprits, and they were very Grecian masks. That were.
Why did she think 2 of them were the culprits?
I'm not sure, but she believed it was those 2, the Greek ones that were, because they were the closest to my room at the time.
Interesting. So you had the experience with in the abandoned house or the house for sale, and you had these out-of-body experiences. Is this the limit to your experiences so far, or are there other things?
So there was another occasion, but this actually took place in Spain, and I believe I must have been 12 or 13 years old. I was with my babysitter at the time, and we were driving down one of these dark, windy roads to get back to the house. And we lived in an old finca, a villa called Finca Mufares in Calvia, Spain. And this road was so dark, very dangerous. And we were driving down the road, and all of a sudden, somebody appears in the middle of the road. And to our shock, we swerve towards the right into the cliffside, scraping the edge of the bumper. We come to a stop, and we get out of the car, and there's no one there.
Wow, interesting.
But if we had went to the left, we would have swerved off the cliff.
Wow. Did you see this yourself?
Yes, and she saw it as well.
How many people were in the car?
Just the 2 of us.
Wow. And what did this person look like?
It looked, I couldn't tell if it was an old man or an old woman, but it looked like they were, covered in a sack of flour. And
Huh.
we did. We looked, we looked for footprints. We looked, we pointed the car lights and over the edge of the cliff. We were looking for a person. We didn't, thankfully the cliffside was not too steep, but very rocky and dangerous nonetheless. We couldn't see anyone. No
It
sign
was
of
at
anyone anywhere.
it was at night.
Yes.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. You've had some interesting experiences. So everything so far has been when you were young. So now in your adulthood, you don't have experiences anymore?
No, not like that.
I see. So, the out of body experiences are interesting because they're fairly neutral. We don't know if those were triggered by anything good or anything bad necessarily. What appeared in the house might have leaned towards something that may not have been pleasant. But do you think there's anything residual from this that you're carrying with you? Did the out of body experiences open up anything in your thinking? Do you think a dark presence inhabits your work in a way, or your mood, or anything like that? Do you think those things are at a distance? You feel safe from it all?
Well, to answer your question, I don't know if those experiences have left any spiritual residue. I do know when I turned 17, my whole outlook on life changed, and it was, I was experiencing some very negative things at the time. And is it a result of those experiences? I couldn't tell you the wiser.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Ariana, I'm glad you shared that story with the listeners. It's fascinating to hear. It's always interesting to hear someone's experience like this, and most people never experience one thing, and then when people do, it's usually the idea that they might have seen a UFO or a ghost, or so, and it may only happen once. And you've had a series of things that have happened to you in your youth, and I'm really appreciative that you shared that story today.
Yes, I also find it really fascinating how across the world we tend to associate similar traits with darker entities, like long, tall, dark figures, the pointed ears or horns and the pointed fingers. Um, it, the dark skin. It's just all very interesting. It doesn't matter the religion or culture. There's a lot of shared similarities across the board.
There are shared experiences that people have. What I find interesting are when young people have the experiences, because the older you get, the more you experience pop culture. And when you experience it, all of a sudden, your images of things that you think you saw resemble a Death Eater from Harry Potter, or it resembles Nosferatu from that old movie, or everything takes on an image or an idea that you've actually seen somewhere. So it gets harder. It gets harder to analyze if these people really had experiences, or you just had a melatonin dream, that just seemed really real, and you think that it was a real experience, or people mistake an optical illusion for something else, or they see some form of technology that they don't understand, or your eyes are playing tricks on you, which is a very real thing. Young people, you get clearer stories from young people because they don't have that vocabulary and that experience in seeing all these things. And that's why I think it's really, rather interesting to hear the take of that from experiences of the young.
And to go back to that story, because, you know, at that age, I hadn't seen any of those movies or pop culture references, but I remember when I did see, you know, Nosferatu or
Harry Potter.
Guillermo del Toro, his work, you know, when he did Bram Stoker's Dracula or The Strain, you know, what I saw it reminded me of what I saw.
Wow.
And that's how, and I was able to use pop culture references to kind of help better describe to you what I saw, because if I didn't have those references, it might be more difficult for you or whoever's listening to understand.
Yeah, and I think that these things have evolved into pop culture because they were experiences with people before that. And that's the interesting thing about it is, you know, really, you know, you can't really create something that you've never really seen before or it's based on it. Like, think of any monster movie that you've seen, any creature film or science fiction. Everything that's made is still really based on something we've seen here on Earth or we've already imagined. There is no new type of thing that people are coming up with because it's all still based on the organics of what we see around here. And that's the interesting thing. So if you go back 2,000 years and you hear stories about people seeing fallen angels or you know, or whatever, or people that are possessed or whatever it might be, those are the early tellings of these things. Like, that's what's really fascinating because it did come from something, because all this stuff had to be witnessed or seen for it to actually ever make its way into literature or pop culture or something like that. So it's really pretty incredible. And of course, if you follow the Old Testament, you read scripture, you'll see where we have the angels visiting. Where we do have fallen angels that wind up you know, staying on Earth. There is, you know, the idea, and you know, even a lot of science today about what happens when you die, and the idea that there could be the theory that there could be ghosts and what they're there for. I talk a lot in my book about that, about what roaming souls are, and people have experiences, and that's the interesting thing. And I'm really glad you shared your story today.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was my pleasure.
I want to
sort of.
Say it again.
I said it was my pleasure, sort of.
So I want you to tell everyone how they can find you. You're on the web and you're on social media. Tell everyone how to find your work.
Yes. So I have my art on my website. That's arianavictoria.com. Ariana spelled with one N. And my Instagram tag is _ Ariana Victoria _
That's Instagram.
Yes, that's for Instagram.
You're on Facebook too, right?
Yes, and for Facebook, it's Ariana Victoria. So it's 2 words.
Definitely go check out her art. It's incredible. I'm a big fan. She's working on all new stuff right now, a brand new collection of work that everyone will be able to see once the world opens back up, right?
Yes.
And I'm excited to see it. And for those of you that want to look at what she's already done, go there and pick up a print, because it's really incredible work. It's powerful. So hopefully fueled by the good side, not the bad side.
It's all relative.
It's all relative, right? Ariana, thanks for joining me, and let's do another one of these when you have your art coming out, and we'll talk again, and maybe you'll have another crazy story to tell. Or hopefully not. Who knows, right? It's all relative, right?
We shall see. These are strange times we're living in.
I know, right? Thanks for joining me this evening, and we'll talk soon. And there it is, Ariana's incredible story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you were terrified by it. What do you think she experienced in that abandoned house? Email me at questwithtodd@gmail.com or leave a voice message at anchor.fm/metatomics. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to Quest. Please be sure and rate and review this podcast. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Be sure to visit the official website for the International Association of Metatomics at metatomics.org or find us on social media for other unique content. And make sure to pick up a copy of the book that started a spiritual revolution, Metatomics, The Grand Design, available for sale online and at most major bookstores. Thanks for listening.